evening here right now. I've got Glenn Peoples, who's appeared on the channel a few times, and I really wish a lot more people knew who Glenn was. When I was first getting into apologetics, Glenn was one of the first people that I found, and I listened to every single episode you put out. I wish that you continued your Right Reason podcast. And I know you're starting to create some more content sort of sporadically, but I love you so much, Glenn, and I want to see more stuff from you. That's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why I invited you on to talk about this. But before you say anything about what I just said,
there's a lot of stuff still just sitting there that people can go and listen to. It's just that people like you need more.
Yes, exactly. There is a considerable backlog for. So if you've never heard of Glenn Peoples, and you'd like to see more about him, then go check out his website, rightreason.org. Is that the correct?
That's the one. Yep.
Correct web address. Yep. And then you've also got a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'm starting to put some stuff out on YouTube. I don't know, it's kind of easier. It seems to me anyway to be less demanding, to just be speaking.
Yeah. Well, I've got some ideas actually for your YouTube channel. We'll talk about that later. But
oh no.
Yeah, so what we're talking about tonight, I should have introduced this at the beginning instead of talking about how much I love Glenn. We're talking about a guy named Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscientist who sort of exploded and blew up on the scene just a few years ago. And actually, let me go ahead and pull up his Wikipedia article. So let me do this first. So I've got a picture of him. This is what the guy looks like. So pretty manly man. This is like one of his sort of shtick is the wrong word. This is kind of like his thing.
Look at those shoulders. Those traps are pretty good.
I know.
Traps.
There was now that I've watched a couple of his videos, he's like starting to pop up more on my feed and stuff. And he like one of the videos that I was watching was like a short, and he had a shirt off. He was like running or something, and he's jacked.
Of course,
he's got a six pack and stuff. And he's a neuroscientist, right? And this is that's like pretty unusual for like this nerdy neuroscientist to be this like, health nut. But that's kind of like his thing is so far as I understand it, he's got this sort of thing where he's coming at you with like all these health tips from the perspective of like a respected neuroscientist. So he talks about brain chemistry.
I described him earlier to you, and others may resonate with this. As he strikes me as kind of, if Jordan Peterson was a buff neuroscientist, this is what he would be like. Very much live straight, be fit, be well, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, wake up, drink some water, get enough sleep. Basics. It seems like basic, stuff. And there was even this one video I was watching a while back that was just on like dopamine and the effects on dopamine on your brain and the sort of activities that you're doing that are creating these sort of abnormally high amounts of dopamine, like social media, staying on your phone all day long, and how that can actually have negative effects on things like it can increase anxiety, it can increase depression, and so it's very, I mean, the guy, like I don't really have any negative things to say about him. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk about this clip where, so far as I understand it, this is one of the first times he's sort of been open publicly about his belief in God. And so we're going to watch a clip from him on the Cameron Haynes YouTube channel, to clip from a longer interview that they did together. And the clip that we're going to get through, it's about 13 minutes long. We may not get through the whole clip, but what we'll do is we'll kind of do what we did in our previous video with Parker Sedecase, where in review videos more generally, is we'll play some of the clip, pause it, comment on it, and I'll be relying on Glenn a bunch to provide some of his comments from his perspective as a Christian philosopher. He's got a PhD and stuff, and he's also, I mean, this is not super well known, but you've also you're currently in an undergrad. Is that correct? You're getting a degree in psychology.
Yeah, I'm retraining in psychology. I'm adding a feather to my cap, maybe one that'll be a bit more useful. We'll see.
Yeah, but I mean, you're still in school for it and everything. So we're not saying that you're this expert in this area, but you can still nevertheless provide, I think, some insight.
Just opinionated.
Yeah. But I'm excited to get to this. Let's first do this though. Let's look at some of the Wikipedia article on Andrew. So he was born 1975. He's an American podcaster, neuroscientist.
Look at that photo. He looks like a child. He's got such an impressive beard now.
Yeah, well, this one is in 2016. So he also looks thinner. He looks like he doesn't look as jacked. So it's kind of small on the screen here, but
yeah, I can see he's been working since then.
Yeah, so let's get down to the podcasting and supplements. So, actually, I guess we can kind of back up with his academic career. So from 2011 to 2015, Huberman was an assistant professor of neurobiology and neuroscience at University of California, San Diego. And then in 2016, he took a faculty position at Stanford University, pretty prestigious university there. He's carried out research on cortisol and anxiety-based depression. That's pretty cool. And then in podcasting and supplements, this is kind of why he's super relevant these days. 2021, Huberman launched the Huberman Lab podcast. In episodes lasting several hours, Huberman talks about the state of research in a specific topic, both within and outside his specialty. And then by 2023, the podcast had become the sixth most popular podcast in the U.S. on Spotify platforms. The sixth most popular. His YouTube channel has 4.3 million subscribers, and his Instagram account 5.2 million. So this dude is pretty popular. Yeah. Like these stats are nothing to balk at.
You dream of those numbers, Cameron.
Not really, but pretty impressive. Very, very impressive stuff. And I think he's actually doing a lot of good. He's doing a lot of good. So, yeah, this guy, but he's recently, again, he's talked about some of his thoughts on God's existence and the fact that he's like prays and meditates and stuff. But Glenn, was there anything else that you wanted to say before we get into the clip that we've got?
That's enough for us to jump in.
Excellent. Let's do it. So, one last thing. So this is kind of new. If you guys have been watching Capturing Christianity for a little while, we're doing something different with super chats. If you want to send in a super chat and support the channel, we will be taking those throughout the stream. So we'll pause what we're doing and come here and talk about your comment or question or whatever else that you want to send in as a super chat. So appreciate that. If you want to do that, obviously you don't have to, but just wanted to let you guys know that's a sort of change that we're doing here. So let's get to the clip from this interview, again, on the Cameron Haynes channel. So we'll just play, and then once we have some thoughts we want to provide, then we'll pause it and give those.
When you're talking about the brain and all the, I mean, you mentioned it last night, and this had me thinking. It's like, when you think how all that works, I have to take an aside and say, how could that happen in nature is without a creator?
Yeah. So, well, here's the thing. I mean, we know that the programs, meaning genes, so genes, DNA, and there's DNA, then there's RNA, and then there's proteins. And proteins are the action end of the game where they say, hey, like, grow over here, don't grow over there, become this kind of cell, dopamine cell or a serotonin cell. We know that those mechanisms are incredibly well conserved from mice to humans. Now, certain things happen in the human brain that you don't see in other species, like the elaboration of the parts of the brain that are involved in context and planning, especially. But the memory systems, the ones that control hormones, breathing, heart rate, they're very similar. Not exactly the same, but very similar.
Okay.
When you start to study and understand brain development, as I did, or neuroplasticity, or dopamine, you have to, meaning I don't care if you're an atheist, agnostic, or believer in creator, you have to step back and just go, wow. Now, then of course there's this difference among scientists as to who believes in God, who doesn't. I'll just go on record. I'm very comfortable saying I believe in God. I do. I think there are many things that science can explain. There are certain things science can't explain, but I'll even go a step further, which is that all the elements of science are entirely compatible with the idea of there being a God. And I'm not.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say that's a good place to stop. So when I first heard the way that he was going, talking specifically about brains and apparently talking about complexity and so on, I thought maybe we were going to be hearing some sort of argument from design, and maybe there is one sort of gently implied here. I don't know, at least not based on what's in this video. It is very short. I don't know what Dr. Huberman would make of very detailed biological arguments for design, like the kind of thing you hear from, say, Michael Behe, William Dembski, and others in the intelligent design camp. But it sounds to me like what he's impressed by is the complexity that he observes in the processes involved in brain development, neuroplasticity, molecules like dopamine, or the processes that underlie our ability to communicate with language and so on. Now, he doesn't dwell on this aspect of belief in God, arguments for God's existence. And after this, he goes on to talk about some experiences in his devotional life, and we'll come to that. So I think there's a latent argument for an intelligent God here that he doesn't say a lot about, but I don't think that's the main thing happening. I mean, I take some issue with those arguments, and I understand you do too, but I don't think that's the main thing here. I think most of what he says here is contained in that one word that he expressed, wow. I don't want to overanalyze it, but he said that you have to step back and say, wow. So it's not looking through the microscope. It's where you step back and you see this overall general impression. It's kind of like a Psalm 19 moment where the psalmist says that the heavens declare the glory of God, not the processes that are going on in this star, but just the heavens. And I think that wow is something like what the Swiss theologian John Calvin called the sensus divinitatis, which is just Latin, so it sounds profound, but it means a sense of the divine, or sort of an instinctive perception that God is there in response to the world that God has made, including us as part of that world. And there's more to say about that, and I want to wait because he's going to say some things where I think it might fit better. But I think that's what that reaction represents. It's not like a close argument. It's just a general sense of being very impressed with the world and having this unprovoked reaction that says, "Hey, there's someone there. This is more than just nature."
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. It's a really profound, it's a really nuanced point, I think, as well, because it's not, I think what you're sort of picking up on is that it doesn't seem like he's giving some sort of argument for God's existence from like the complexity of biology or anything like that. And so he's not either giving that, and he's not saying that that's like what happened to him personally. If what you're saying is correct here, is that he had this sort of wow moment. And so he was more just like recognizing based on something that he, saw, just immediately recognizing that there's something going on here.
And on
there's
things that he
there.
keeps seeing, because he lists a few different types of phenomena, and it's like he sees the next thing and he's like, it's there again. And this thing that I can't shake. Everything I look at just seems to be a kind of confirmation of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what I wanted to say about that is that that's a completely from my perspective, it's a completely sanguine is maybe the term. It's a completely like unobjectionable way of coming to believe in God, on my view. You see something and you just find yourself believing that God exists. So like here's another example. So he was talking about biology, right, and talking about neuroscience and the different stuff that happens in the brain and dopamine and how it all works together. But there's other situations, other experiences that you might have in which the same sort of, you might get the same sort of sensation or the same experience. So like for me, it's viewing a particularly beautiful sunset. That's typically when I find myself just in awe of, God's majesty, or like God is just so amazing that there's no one else that could create something like this. I find myself with that belief. And so, and I mean, you've talked about this on your podcast as well, Sensus Divinitatis and Reformed Epistemology. And I don't really see much wrong with that, though. I know that skeptics might have some issues. They might say, well, in order to have a rationally justified belief in God's existence, it can't just be this wow moment. You've got to have an argument for your belief in God's existence.
I mean, if you read the work of someone like Alvin Plantinga, who's kind of like has been for the last 50 years or however long he's been writing, it feels like a long time, the main proponent of Reformed epistemology, it's more than just wow. If you get right down into the weeds of it, the claim is that from within his theological framework, his view of human beings is that we were created so that when we function properly, the way that we were designed to function, we naturally apprehend God's existence from the world around us. So it isn't just a wow. It's I guess in a similar way that we naturally apprehend the physical world around us through senses like being able to see and hear. It's just the product of the proper function of our belief-forming structures is to believe in God.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on someone who says, well, you still, nevertheless, even if you want to say that that's like the result of something that is functioning properly, nevertheless, things that can sort of quote unquote function properly can still go astray,
of course they
in
can.
terms of our beliefs and everything. So what would you say to someone who would object to this line and say, well, you've still got to have an argument. If you don't have an argument, then you shouldn't believe in God.
Well, it's just blatantly untrue. I mean, the way that we form beliefs generally when it comes to our perception of the world, we don't offer arguments that I can see a tree over there. I don't need to offer an argument for that. Now, if someone doesn't believe that I can see a tree over there, and I want to persuade that person that I can, then I need an argument. Yeah. But in order for me to be justified or to be perfectly warranted, to be perfectly rational in believing it, I don't need an argument. I just need to be placed in the circumstances where that belief is correctly formed.
Alvin Plantinga, famously, he's got a book called God and Other Minds, and he basically points out that there are no good arguments for the thesis that other minds exist. And so that's just a sort of another sort of mundane belief that the vast majority of humans have, that there are other people out there. And you probably haven't come to that through some particularly strong argument. Rather, what happens
is you don't infer that there are other minds. Your experiences just make you think, well, of course there are.
Yeah. And so, and that's a perfectly reasonable. Like, there's nothing epistemically wrong about the way that happened, and if you do that, if you want to say, that's one of his reasons for adopting his view, is that if you want to say that's a wrong, that's wrong in some way, like you've got to have arguments. Then if you do that, then you're going to wind up in a really skeptical situation. So you're going to be skeptical. You're going to have to be skeptical the vast majority of things that you believe, because think about, here's one example. So memory. Okay. Think about any belief that you have on the basis of memory, like what you ate for breakfast. When you think about what you ate for breakfast, more than likely, you're not coming up with some argument in your mind that is then persuading you about what you ate for breakfast. Rather, what happens is you think about it and you find yourself believing, okay, yeah, I ate, like this morning, I ate waffles with my kids. I can't see the waffles right now. Maybe I could go and find some evidence that I did that, but that's not what happens. That's not what happens on an everyday basis. Is you just remember what such and such, and then you find yourself with that belief. And so that is a problem if you want to say that you've got to have arguments in this case. For your belief to be rational, you're going to run into skepticism.
As I say, you've got to have arguments if you want to be persuasive, and that's a perfectly acceptable position to hold. And Plantinga's position is not immune from critique. But what he would say, and in fact what he has says, is the way that, according to my religious beliefs, and he thinks that this is biblical, and you can argue about the case for that with the early chapters of Romans and the way that we perceive God's existence. See, but according to this belief that I have about the way God works, is that he's made us in such a way that we naturally form belief in God when we are placed in the appropriate circumstances, namely in creation, when we are healthy and our faculties are working properly. You can argue that, in fact, that isn't true, that's not how your belief in God is formed. Okay, but that's fine. But if the things that he's saying about the way God works and the way human minds work is true, then it's a perfectly rational belief to hold. So in other words, you can't attack the rationality of that without at least being willing to engage with whether or not it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's move on and listen to more of the clip from Dr. Huberman. How about that?
The first scientist to say this. I mean, Einstein believed in God. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists ever, clearly believed in God. There are many atheist scientists. There are agnostic scientists who are just kind of like unsure, right? And, for me, I'm in absolute awe of biology. It's just incredible that we're sitting here having this conversation. It's with language, that there are little sound waves that you're perceiving and understanding. I mean, it's just... And I think the brain represents the apex of incredible in terms of biology. Like the heart is interesting, the immune system is interesting, the liver is interesting, but the brain is unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, think about the number of different ways you can move your body compared to another species. Think about what you did today. Think about what I was attempting to do today, right? Yeah. Spectacular. Think about technology, these lights,
Yeah, I think this highlights the point that you were making. Like he's basically just saying, "Wow." It's similar to like, again, back to the example that I gave of like when I see a beautiful sunset, I have the same reaction. I'm like, "Man, that is incredible," And then I think that's probably what I think you hit the nail on the head here. That's like the important part of the comment that he's making here.
Tesla cars, spaceships. I mean, the internet. I mean, unbelievable, and yet so real. Yeah. So I mean, we could talk a bit about how well, I'll just say this. Secretly, I've always prayed. I grew up in a split religion home. My family's like the UN. We've got people from Guatemala, Denmark, Argentina, New York, like. All the different political battles are in my family. Super left, super right, libertarians, lefties to the, it's crazy. Thanksgivings can be difficult. Yeah. But I'll say this, I absolutely pray. I absolutely love that the idea, but also what for me is really a deep belief, which is that we can't control everything. We're not in as much control as we think we are. And that the magnificence of biology and the magnificence of nature is it's impossible for me to conceive how that could come about any other way.
Yeah, now this is where I have the most to say because there is a lot there. I don't know what I would call it. Maybe I would call it prayer to the unknown God. Have we got to the part yet where he says he started to read the Bible?
No, not yet.
Actually, play a little bit more because that will tie in nicely.
Okay. I did want to highlight a bit about the fact that like his inference here, if he is making an inference that this couldn't have come about any other way. I had a couple of philosophers, a philosopher and a scientist on recently talking about a case for God's existence from evolution. So some people think that, you've got to reject evolution and then that somehow supports God's existence, intelligent design and stuff. But then there are others who think like the two guests that I had on, Zachary Ardern and I can't remember the other guy's name. Rope, I think is his last name. But they came on and they were like, well, so even if we assume that evolution is true, that is still nevertheless evidence for the existence of God. So I think that both of those, like depending on where he wants to go. So like if Dr. Huberman is a sort of evolutionist, or believes in evolution, which I don't know his thoughts on that, so he may or may not.
I would be surprised if he doesn't, working in neuroscience.
Right. So it seems like what he's saying is that evolution, the way that we've sort of come about is through evolution, but that nevertheless, even still, points to God in some way. And so I wanted to point out that that's entirely compatible.
Yeah. And when he says, belief in God is compatible with the sciences, I think that's what he meant.
Oh, yeah.
Look, some people assume that there is this conflict here. There's really not. I've heard it said that in order for evolution to produce this, you and me, it would have taken a miracle.
All right. Well, let's continue here and get to the point where you just let me know when you'd like me to pause.
It just is. Now, I think that, full stop.
Who do you pray to?
That's an interesting one because I think God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I absolutely do. I've actually started reading the Bible recently.
I like how I was just going to comment on this. I like how he it seemed like he was about to trail off and describe like some other being, but then he was just like, no, I need to say it. I need to just say that I pray to God.
Yeah. It's like, I'm going to be vague and spiritual, but actually it's
God.
And I like the way that reveals that generally speaking, when we say God, we know what we mean.
Right.
We mean the kind of God who is in the Bible, there is only one of him. In fact, I think this is because he's not religious, and so he doesn't profess to know God, I don't know if he would say that or not, but that's the way I'm reading this. But he does read the Bible, which is fascinating. So there is a particular kind of God that he seems to have in mind, and this goes back,
which we haven't got to that comment yet, but we'll get to it soon.
He just said he reads the Bible.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we hadn't got to that yet.
We have. It goes back to what I was saying about our natural perception that there is a God, because, and this is very reformed of me, but that's okay because I am somewhat reformed. Alongside the fact that we do naturally perceive God's existence, and the empirical evidence, by the way, dramatically confirms that we do naturally believe in God. Belief in God is the normal state for human beings. It's perfectly natural for children to come to believe that there is agency behind the universe without being religiously indoctrinated, that it's just the way we normally think as healthy, ordinary people. It's just false that people are born atheists. You hear that sometimes. It's untrue. There's no evidence for that claim. We are born inclined to believe. But alongside this is the problem, and I say it's reformed, but Catholics and other Christians believe in this too. There is the problem of human finitude and sin, which we think is a real problem that we live with. Certainly you find this idea in Calvin that we don't respond appropriately to the apprehension that God is there, and that manifests in all sorts of ways in what some philosophers have called the noetic effects of sin, the way that sin affects our scholarship and our reasoning and all that. So it manifests, for example, in the fact that there are so many conflicting manifestations of religion. Obviously, then are they all kind of reaching out to the same God, but they can't all be correct. Some of them must be wrong, but they're doing something in common. And so Calvin's perspective and mine, and I'm assuming probably yours, what's needed in order to bring that broad awareness of God into focus is God's self-revelation. And that's in Scripture, and of course it's in the person of Jesus Christ. And so the cautionary comment, well, I say and so, but in addition to that, there's a cautionary comment that I alluded to earlier, and that speaks to a broader phenomenon. There is this appeal of Andrew Huberman, and a kind of obvious appeal to women, but especially to men, of being healthy, looking after your mind, working out, praying, or apparently being spiritual, and on top of that. And it's kind of, Jordan Peterson does this kind of thing too. And I have similar concerns there, even though I really appreciate him. If you do that, then you're complete. You're looking after everything, every aspect of you. So prayer is kind of like working out, keeping yourself well.
Yeah.
And look, there is truth to that. Don't get me wrong. There's absolutely truth to that. But what that leaves us with is a very light version of what some sociologists call ethical monotheism. Not faith in God, a kind of generic theism, a spiritual aspect to your life, but it's not saving faith in God, in Christ, who gave himself to save you from your sin, to reconcile you to God, to give you everlasting life. Now, look, I don't want to be too hard on Dr. Huberman. I don't know him, and maybe for him this is a kind of step along the way. He gives the impression that some of this is new. He's started reading the Bible. Possibly discovering Christ isn't far away, and obviously I hope it is in the near future. It isn't far away. But the sort of caution that I express about this and about Jordan Peterson and probably others, it's very close to a Christian view of the world, but it's not. And some of the things that he says might prompt people to head down that road and find Christ, and that's wonderful. And I don't want to rain on his parade. But, okay, so this idea that prayer is just something that's good for you, like eating well or working out, you do hear that sometimes. And I want to delve into that. You see, some time ago, I believe it was 2012. I didn't write this down, but I think that's right. There was a study that came out from the British Journal of Psychiatry, and it was called Religion, Spirituality, and Mental Health, Results from a National Study of English Households. Some people think I'm English. I'm not, by the way. I'm in New Zealand. I just talk like a bit of a ponce. And I became aware of this study because there was some highly misleading buzz that I was seeing in social media. There always is. About spiritual people, presumably including Christians, being more susceptible to mental illness. And they were saying there's a study out that supports this. And now, in general, more recent studies indicate that religion is good for you. But there was this one that people were excited about. So I dug out the study and I read it. And I discovered that, as usual, the buzz was highly misleading, because they weren't using the categories of data properly. They weren't stratifying the data the way that the study did. The study distinguished between three groups of people. So first, there were people who were religious, and they were those who subscribed to an organized religion. Then there were people who described themselves not as religious, but spiritual. Right? So it's a different category. And, they were the sort of... the stereotypical basic white girl, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. They're sort of open to the universe. They believe in a higher power that is all around us or some such thing, but not religious. And then there was a category for people who were not religious or spiritual. And this is sort of the dark territory where atheists live. And the study looked at a number of measures of psychological well-being, including things like substance use, general happiness, mental health diagnoses, psychiatric medication, and so on, stuff like that. And while those who weren't religious or spiritual, so I guess atheists, maybe some agnostics, but people in that broad group did much worse, and I mean a lot worse than others when it came to substance abuse, which is counted as a psychological issue, including drinking and drug use. When it came to having mental health diagnoses or being on psychiatric medication, it was those who were spiritual but not religious who had the higher rates. The group that in general fared best across all measures were those who followed an organized religion. Now, without trying to get too into the weeds about possible causation, because that's a minefield, let's bring those findings to bear on this idea that prayer is good for you, because that's the implication here. Now, this is, of course, just Dr. Huberman's anecdote. It's his personal experience. But be cautious about translating that into any sort of vague notion that being spiritual is good for you. The evidence doesn't really support that. Now, it might be, of course, it might be good for you. Maybe the findings that I was just talking about are because people who experience psychological distress become more open to the spiritual as they search for solace. And maybe that works to some degree. That might explain that correlation. But there's evidence that a well-ordered life, one with optimal mental well-being, is one that is informed by the structure imposed on reality by an organized religious view of the world, not just some airy-fairy notion of spirituality. So that interests me. I'm interested in Dr. Huberman's trajectory here because he's not just praying. He seems to have a broadly Christian view of God. When he said, I pray to God, he expected you to know basically what he means. He started reading the Bible. So it looks to me like he's taking part in the experiential part of Christianity without, or at least without yet, having all of the cognitive content that goes along with that. So maybe that'll be part of the evolution. Maybe some of these things will start to pop up and he'll say, you know what, based on the way that I live and the experiences that I'm having, what I'm now reading about Jesus kind of makes sense. And that would be great if it does go that way. But so it's not just that spirituality and prayer are good for you. The evidence doesn't quite support that. But being religious, which is just gross for some people, is associated with overall well-being of the kind that he is describing.
So I wanted to actually bring in another dimension, which is still related, which is the sort of Pascalian line, the Pascal's wager. You know, there's been some recent developments on this argument in the recent years. One of the philosophers who's been on talking about is Liz Jackson. I was here with amazing. Her. Oh yeah. Yeah. When was that?
She was doing all the work in that one. I was just tagging along.
No, but Pascal's wager, I think that there's a lot of overlap between what you've been talking about and even what Huberman's talking about, because he seems to be drawing on a lot of the pragmatic benefits of prayer and meditation and stuff. And so that's obviously something that is related to Pascal's wagers, where you want to be concerned with outcomes and the total. I can't think of the name right now. The utility of the committing yourself to Christianity in some way, and the utility that can come from something like that, potential utility. So
is that Pascal's wager? I don't know, because I think what we're seeing here is sort of the observation that it works.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Pascal's wager is, look, suppose you get to a point where you're not sure if it's true, you're still better off acting like it is. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, well, a very different spin on it, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the connection that I'm seeing is that both of them are interested in sort of pragmatic reasons for acting a certain way.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
So yeah, on the Pascal's wager argument, you're acting in a certain way, or you're committing yourself to Christianity. It doesn't even, Pascal's wager, that's one of the misconceptions about it, doesn't even need to require that you believe certain things. You can just commit yourself to, like in Huberman's case, you can commit yourself to pray and stuff like that. And so there are some ways. I know you just cited the study and said that spirituality, someone who is spiritual yet not religious, that can actually have there's some negatively correlated things that can happen with that. But I think overall, like it would still be, if the trajectory is that direction, I think that can still be good. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I wanted to be, I hopefully conveyed that I wanted to be careful in saying that just being spiritual is bad for you. We don't necessarily know that. It's just no clear evidence that it's good for you. Yeah, as I say, it could just be that being spiritual is a response to these negative well-being factors that you're experiencing. And so being spiritual is a way of reaching out and trying to find some sort of solution, in which case it's not the spirituality that's doing you any harm. It may even be doing you good. Maybe they'd be worse without the spirituality. It's just interesting to me that when it came to, say, the mental health thing, those who were not spiritual or religious kind of sat between those who were religious on the one hand and those who were spiritual on the other. They were sort of, they had issues, but who doesn't? Whereas it was spiritual who were way off on the. And I find that this is quite tangential, but I'll say it anyway because I feel like it. I find that in a number of things, when you properly stratify the data, you find interesting phenomena like those. So, for example, I heard, and this is a while ago now, that religious men are more abusive husbands, and I thought, number one, that's really troubling, but number two, I don't think it's true. I mean, my hunch was that doesn't sound like it's true. And so I went into the data, and sure enough, there was some stratification in the data that this simplistic claim wasn't taking into account. And what you found is that the degree of religiosity made a difference. And so if you split up the data into people who were religious and who were quite religious about it, and that they were committed and practiced their religion, so I guess more organized religion, they did best in terms of not being associated with domestic violence and that kind of abuse. Next were people who were not religious at all in terms of outcomes. But the worst were those who were just kind of nominally religious but not committed to it. And I thought, that's interesting. Why would they be worse? And it's a similar kind of thing that we're seeing here with people who are spiritual but not really practicing religion. They seem to have the butt of the outcomes. And I'm like, I don't really have a strong theory about this, but that's interesting to me. That the most healthy life is quite a religious one, and the one where you're kind of being correlated with sort of being off the rails in a number of measures is a sort of, well, I have a sense of religion, I believe, but I'm not really religious about it. That's associated with all kind of negative things. And I'm not 100% sure what to do with that other than to say, hey, maybe stay away from that. Maybe don't be that person.
So this has really gotten me to think about, well, there's kind of two different things that have been going on in the clips that we've seen so far. So we've talked about the sort of intellectual reasons that Huberman has offered for his faith in God, which he's talked about like biology and stuff. And even there, we were saying that it was more like this kind of like wow, sensation that he's getting. But I would still categorize that as intellectual, okay, because that's just something that's happening, similar to when you interact with other people and you form the belief that other people exist. Right. I wouldn't.
It's like beliefs formed on the basis of perception. It's a rational process.
Yes. Still rational process. So that fits into the intellectual category. But then on the other side of things, like I think one of the reasons why Dr. Huberman does what he does with prayer and meditation and stuff is because it is healthy. And so there's a lot of pragmatic reason to do these things. We've talked about that a little bit. But I wonder. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I wonder if there's a way to sort of marry the two, okay? Because sort of traditionally, pragmatic reasons are not necessarily intellectual reasons. Like you can have really good reason to do something pragmatically, like if it's going to work really well or be beneficial in some way, but that doesn't mean that you therefore have an intellectual reason to assent to that thing, right? So, but I wonder if there's a way to sort of marry the two. So, here's the kind of thought, and it's sort of half baked. So I'm gonna need your help on this. So the idea would be something like, if something that you do makes you healthier, then that like aligns some way with the way that the world was designed to work ultimately. So I wonder if there's like, because he's very focused obviously on health and everything, But I wonder if there's a way to marry his concern for being healthy and the things that he's doing to be healthy, and with the sort of metaphysical picture of the world. Yeah, so is there a way to tie in health with God's existence?
The way that I would be inclined to do it is that if you are created by an intelligent God who loves you, then obeying him should be good for you. Because why would he tell you to live in a way that is self-destructive? You would think he would do the opposite. And I think broadly speaking, now, you can't make a direct inference. This is good for you, therefore it's true. Because someone might say, well, some forms of delusion are good for you. But you can make the inference the other way around. If it's the case that God created you and loved you, then you can infer that the way that he calls you to live, if done well, is going to be good for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do wonder, so like on the, if we assume the conditional statement, if Christianity is true, then we would expect that living a certain way would have these positive benefits because we're assuming that God loves us and cares about us and stuff. And so, and that's basically what you just said. But I wonder, like, if we take God out of the picture, okay, and we're just assuming that atheism is true and trying to figure out, like, what then would we expect if atheism were true, if God didn't exist? What sort of world would we expect there to be?
I think,
and it does actually.
Okay.
Well, it does actually. Yeah, it does actually seem like that data would be surprising, that living a sort of traditional religious life would have all these pragmatic benefits. That seems surprising given atheism.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's kind of a difficult thought experiment for me because I think given atheism, nothing would exist. But if we can kind of get past some of those hurdles, counterintuitively to me, but right? It's like, well, okay, we're arguing about what unicorns would do if they were real.
Well, then you should actually agree with me. Then you should agree with me. Like, if atheism is true, then that stuff would be unexpected.
Well, yeah, everything is unexpected. But I think, look. So if we get past that, the world exists broadly as it is, and atheism is true. I think all bets are off, because it's not as though there is some sort of cosmic law that says you should only believe what is true. Neither is there any sort of cosmic law that says you should do what makes you happy or what makes other people happy or whatnot. Mm-hmm. Just if you find that something is making you happy, then you will probably want to do it. And I'm not even going to say, so keep doing it, because there's no such law as that, but you probably will keep doing it. And for some people that will be to engage in religious practice. For a lot of people, that will be to engage in religious practice. There are people who sincerely tell me that they find themselves to be intellectually and emotionally fulfilled without any kind of religious practice. I think that there are some psychological consequences of the type of lack of cosmic hope that atheism brings with it. But I can imagine the atheist replying by saying that there are probably some lies that are beautiful and will make you feel good. So if you're ugly, believe that you're not. That kind of thing.
Yeah. All right, well let's do this. Let's go back to the clip here, because we've still got what is that? 9 more minutes to get through. We may not get through the whole thing, but let's play at least a little bit more of it.
Start to finish. I feel like it's my duty to like learn and in some sense compare Old and New Testament. Mm-hmm. I'm like,
see, this is the part that I was expecting him to say, and that's the part that I have associated with the part where he talks about the Bible. I think I got focused on something else when he made that comment, but yeah, he does start talking about the Bible and prayer and stuff. But let's continue.
Like, really, I'm really interested in the stories, but I'm fascinated by the story of us, right, and the story of everything. And so, but yeah, I pray out loud in the morning. Sometimes again in the middle of the night if I wake up. Mm-hmm. And it's only recently that I've been doing this more often.
It's giving you peace?
Oh, my goodness. It's given me so much. It's given me peace. And, this is going to sound weird, and probably people are going to be like, what are you talking about? If this, it works. Mm-hmm. It works. There's a way in which certain things I was grappling with, I just couldn't resolve. I couldn't do it. And it was all internal, and I just couldn't do it.
How were you trying to resolve these things? Like have an answer?
Yeah, discipline myself. I mean, it wasn't like I was super, undisciplined. I mean, obviously I have a lot of self-discipline, but I always pray, I want to remove my defects of character. I want to, I certainly pray for other people. I mostly, these days I pray for the ability to really harness as much care and love for other people and for myself, something I haven't been that good at in my lifetime, in order to be able to put the best possible work into the world, to really serve. Like I really see myself as serving higher power. Like I'm a conduit.
Right.
And the better I can do that, the better I'm serving. The better I'm serving, the more I feel connected to humanity.
Do you think that with this, I don't know if you've always felt like this. It sounds like it's more of a newer feeling. But
somewhat, although secretly.
Yeah.
Like in Santa Barbara, I'll just say there's this place, Sands Beach, down at the end of the beach, if anyone's ever been there. And I used to run down there once a week. I always did a long run, long for me, run on Sunday, minus a 72-pound rock.
Right.
And I would pray. And I just pray for, be honest with myself, be honest with others.
And that was years ago.
I was 18.
Oh, okay.
19, 20. So, and then, I've seen some hardship along the way. I mean, I would just mention that I've had 3 amazing scientific advisors. Harry shot himself 2 weeks after I told him we published a paper in Science. He said, come on down to Santa Barbara. It'd be great to take you out for pizza and celebrate. 2 weeks later, ate a bullet in the bathtub. Barbara died of cancer when she was 50. I'm friends with her daughter. I, saw her. She did have those 2 kids. One's a neuroscientist.
Oh man.
At McGill, and she was like a mom to me. She died. I was speaking at her memorial, and then my postdoc advisor died. He was a pretty impressive guy in his own right. And so at one point, I'm thinking like, what's going on? I'm the common denominator.
Right.
How am I picking these people? But they were amazing, and I had some friends commit suicide, this kind of thing. And you live long enough, that's going to happen. People are going to go. That's just the reality. But there were times I'm like, it was dark. It was, like, where am I? Why me? And at those moments too, just accepting that there's a plan and it's happening for a reason and I don't know what it is, and just putting my trust in that has allowed me to grieve those things properly and to really try and, I got the message, I got the download to take the lessons from them and just not waste a single day and to do things that I really felt mattered. So to me, it's always been linked to, sort of forces greater than me, certainly.
Does it feel like, when I hearing the...
Do you have any thoughts so far on...
It's interesting to hear him say prayer works on the grounds that prayer in terms of being an aid for self-development works. Because that's not necessarily... I mean, I think if someone like St. Paul were to say prayer works, he would not mean that. And who was it? I should know, but it's been a while since I read the verse. Was it James? Yeah, I think it was James, because he was talking about healing at the time, where he said, the fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. It's famous in its King James version. He did not mean what Andrew Huberman means when he says that prayer works. What James meant, and I don't mind confessing that this is the area that I struggle with, I've never been impressed by most anti-Christian apologists and their arguments when it comes to things like evil or suffering or hiddenness or the behavior of the church or what have you. But the thing that I've always struggled with, which is, I think, vastly outweighed by everything else, so don't worry, is this claim that prayer works. Because when someone like St. James says that prayer works, what he means is when you pray in this certain way, you will see the outcome that you are praying for. And in his case, he meant healing of other people of physical ailments. I wonder what Andrew Huberman would think about cases like that in light of his conviction that prayer works.
That would be interesting to get his thoughts on. Let's continue though.
All this, does it feel like once you've taken like a more, I don't know, intentional turn for being grateful and praying, you're not drinking since 2019, it seems like that's been in tandem with your success.
Absolutely. I always wanted to have a deeper relationship to God. I always wanted that. And I kind of was like, why don't I have that? Well, duh. That's like saying, I want to be fit. Why I'm not fit? Well, because you're not running, you're not lifting, you're not doing the things. It was like, and it was a couple of different people that kept showing up in my life and they were doing it. And it was like, well, pray. And, I've learned, and I certainly try and do this, that a lot of prayer is about listening. And a lot of prayer is about you ask for things or listen for things. And then an hour later, 2 days later, you go, wait, like it doesn't happen in the moment necessarily, just like fitness. I don't want to compare fitness. I don't want to trivialize prayer by comparing to fitness, but there's some parallels that are relevant.
It's consistent work.
Yeah, it's consistent work. And then all of a sudden, like things come up and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. That makes so much sense. Now, I think that the success of the podcast, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful for it, incredibly grateful. But in many ways, I'm doing exactly what I was doing when I was that 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid. I'm learning and sharing. So it was always in me. And it always felt like this energy, this thing, like, it's like, how did I end up like this? How come all the other kids like don't have this? And how come sometimes it feels like a little bit of not a curse, but kind of a burden? Like, what do I do with this? And the deep satisfaction for me comes from acknowledging this is me. I've always been this way. It's not going to change. And that it's not coming from me, it's coming through me.
Right.
And I just want to do right by it. And I think we talked a little bit.
It's a gift, and you're honoring your gift.
That's right.
Essentially.
Yes. Well,
and I feel like if we're honoring our gifts, we're rewarded.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest rewards recently comes from, and we talked a little bit about this on the mountain today. It's like, for me, the sweet spot that I finally get steady glimpses of is being loving, but also realistic. Like you can be so loving that you lose touch with the reality. Too much trust isn't good either. But you don't want to be unloving to yourself and others, because then you look at the world through cynical lens, and then you're not going to be doing your best work. So for me, it's all about being loving, but realistic. And I think prayer helps me arrive there. It does many, many other things. I also just feel like our time here is limited, and I've been so blessed by people that have come along. I mean, those academic mentors meant everything to me, but so did the academic mentors that I didn't work for directly that helped me along. So did the high school football coach that taught me how to lift. So did Lex Friedman, you, Joe Rogan, right? Rich Roll, people who gave me the opportunity to talk on their podcasts about science, and then eventually, we started our own podcast. So to me, it's this like beautiful ecosystem, and I never ever think of myself as like, okay, like I'm here professing to people. I just love being a part of it. I also, just like when I was a kid, I'm crewed up with a bunch of great people, and it's not all guys. Rhonda Patrick too, who, by the way, folks, people always say, who was first man in on public facing science and health education? Not first man, first woman. It was Rhonda. She was the first. Then came Matt Walker, me, some others, right? So I think the community of podcasters also, I feel like, wow, like this is as great as when I discovered neuroscience. And I actually feel more resonance with podcasters because it's really like of the love. You can't have a podcast that is worth anything in terms of its success or its content unless the person doing it loves that thing.
Right.
Like you can't, it's not journalism, it's not media. I mean, and there's a media component because it's public facing, but it's like you love bow hunting.
Yeah.
You love fitness. You love hammering away every day, right?
Right.
And so you're basically talking about the things that you would be doing anyway. And so am I, and so is Joe, and so is Lex, and so is Rich, so is Rhonda.
Yeah.
And
we're getting paid for this.
Right, exactly.
I do this for free.
Exactly. So if anyone out there wants to do a podcast or social media, what I would say is make sure that what you talk about is something that you really, truly care about.
All right. Yeah. They kind of got off topic.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that wraps up the last of the comments. What did you have prepared to say in response to that last bit?
I didn't have anything prepared, but there are things to say there.
Oh, okay.
I didn't quite like the suggestion that is your professional success and the success of your podcast and the rise of your celebrity status a result of your praying, which is not quite what he said, but almost. I thought, okay, that's a little bit cynical. But one thing that he said, which was so on point and always relevant to many things, but especially to Christians. Well, I say especially to Christians because that's something that's especially relevant to me. When he said that, I always wanted to have this relationship with God, but I wasn't spending any time thinking or praying or any of that stuff. So, of course, I didn't have one. I thought, well, yeah, obviously. But that's so true of the Christian devotional life, where someone might say, oh, my relationship with God isn't that great. And I'll say something like, well, when did you last read your Bible? I don't really do that. When did you last set aside, and I don't mean as a passing thing you do during the day, when did you last set aside time and pray? Well, I don't really do that stuff because God kind of feels so far away. Why do you think that might be? It's so, and I don't want to bag on particular types of Christians on this occasion. That's not what it's about. But when someone does not spend their time carefully reading their Bible or engaging in any sort of intellectual learning about God, and they don't spend their time in structured prayer, and yet somehow they think they've gotten to be so spiritual that God gave them a word for me. No, he didn't. If you don't know God well enough to spend time praying or reading the scripture, then he's not going to go out of his way to do things like that.
I think that is on point. His comment was on point, and then that was on point as well, to really point out that if you want to see yourself, I mean, that's kind of what his point was, is that he wanted to be that person. He wanted to be someone who was closer to God. And then he just asked the more basic question, like, what steps are you actually taking to get to that point?
How does a person who is close to God live? Well, then I should do that.
Yeah, exactly. And some of his other comments on other stuff are very relevant here as well. It's like there are, I mean, it's a lot of psychological, neuroscientific stuff that goes on, and I think explains a lot of like why we do what we do. And it may just be the case that you're engaging in other activities that just trigger so much dopamine in your brain that you're being overstimulated all the time with social media, watching TV, or playing video games, or whatever else that you're doing. And so when you actually sit down and start to read your Bible, it's like boring to you. It's like you're not getting the same sort of like dopamine response that you get when you're doing other activities. Even like eating junk food, that's another dopamine triggering activity. And I mean, some of his other comments, he didn't really talk about this in this episode, but the other stuff that he talks about with the reward centers in our brain and stuff, I think that can actually explain a lot of why we don't want to engage in the spiritual disciplines, because we're just not being rewarded in the same way that we are when we do other activities. Even something like watching a sports game, like you get so much dopamine from watching, your favorite sport playing something.
Oh, I don't.
And
I can't stand.
Well, not you.
Yeah.
But for people,
people
that do, I mean, it doesn't have to be sports; it can be anything. But I think, but what you've got to do when you're sort of overstimulated and you've got too many things going on is that you've got to start to cut out stuff, and you've got to sort of refocus what you're doing. And there's a whole lot of science behind that as well, behind these sort of I may have heard it from him or someone else, a dopamine detox, where you like put those devices and you put those things away for a while and you sort of try to get back to like doing basic stuff. It's a very practical thing to do if you're looking to get back into engaging in spiritual disciplines. Get off your phone. Just stop it. Stop. I mean, I know this is kind of ironic because we're doing this on YouTube, on social media, but like pause the video, stop it, and go pray, go do something.
Yeah. I mean, if I look at the individual engagements that I have on social media, I'm much more mature about this stuff than I used to be. Gosh, I'm looking at the people in your comment section right now thinking, I used to be like that. Because you can see the perpetual arguments. They're not watching the video. I used to be like that. And so I still engage in social media a lot, but like this, in a way that I hope is productive. But, you see people looking at their phones in church. I'm like, there's a sermon being preached right now.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I honestly think a lot of it does come down to dopamine, is that they're just not getting the same levels of dopamine that they get from doing other activities like scrolling on their phones. And so they just don't do it because it's too boring. I see it in my kids too. Like they only want to do the things that produce all the dopamine. And and it's so bad. It's so bad for us to do that. And so I think we need to do a whole lot better. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time. It's like they just didn't put it in these sort of scientific terms. The sort of studies that you were citing earlier, it's like, you've got to engage and be like a traditional religious person, and that's actually going to produce all of these positive benefits for you and for other people.
Yeah.
But that requires you to put your phone down. It requires you to sit down and pray and actually think different. About stuff.
Not everyone is wired the same way. But I know that for me, I had to, and this only partly, but it does partly explain why I'm not as active these days online, because of the sorts of unhelpful affirmations that it provided and the sort of conflicts that I would find myself drawn into. And I've really withdrawn a lot from that. I spend time in my workshop. I spend time studying. I spend time with my family and members of my church. And sometimes I have conversations online. And that's so much. And I know that there are people who would rather I did other things because they benefit from them. I benefit from not doing them.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. I think that's actually going to wrap up the show for us today. But is there any other thoughts that you wanted to share on that clip that we hadn't got to?
No, not really. I mean, overall, it's good to see that there are role models who are saying, hey, it's okay to be spiritual, not to trivialize it. But once upon a time, it would have been assumed that if a person was scientifically informed and a public voice of science, they weren't religious, or they were closed off to religion. Now that's not the case, and that's because of people like Jordan Peterson, because of people like Dr. Huberman, and there are others I know. And that's a fantastic phenomenon. I'm really glad to see it, but there are some caveats that come with it. Spirituality in and of itself isn't necessarily a healthy thing, although it may bring some good things. But and it should, hopefully, because these comments have been about spirituality and well-being, hopefully they'll provoke you to look further, because there is some really fascinating and helpful information out there about the relative healthy states when it comes to what type of spirituality you're engaged in. Yeah.
Another thing I would just suggest to people is that, I mean, and this is coming from an apologist, this is an apologetics channel, YouTube channel, but there are really good arguments for the truth of Christianity. And so you don't have to necessarily live in this space of like, okay, this is healthy for me, and I'm in awe of this, and so therefore I'm going to be somewhat religious and stuff. Like, you don't have to stay in that space. I think there's ways to engage and go deeper And one of those avenues is philosophy, history, apologetics and stuff. And,
I
and
think
there's a
best
lot to
case
that.
scenario, someone who is intellectually inclined and so finds Andrew Huberman's stuff interesting will pick up on the spiritual aspect of it, and then being an intellectual, they'll be drawn down the rabbit hole of, well, what are the intellectual implications of a spiritual or religious outlook on the world, and are they defensible? That, I think, is one possible outcome of this. That would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do kind of feel like actually plugging a podcast episode. I'll pin it in a comment. There's a 3-hour episode I did with 2 other scholars talking about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And so if you are one of these people, you want to look into things further, that's a really, really great resource. 3 hours of a podcast conversation that we covered so much data. It's incredible. There's so much out there. But I'm gonna point you guys to go check out the comments. But Glenn, as usual, thanks for coming on. Hope you had a good Sunday. And it's Sunday over there, right? It's Saturday.
It is
here.
Sunday. I was at church this morning. Yes.
How was it? How was church?
It was church.
Well, I guess that's good. But Glenn, no, for real. Thanks for coming on, sharing your thoughts, and maybe we can do some more work together. So
yeah, that'd be nice.
Appreciate it. All right, and go check out his YouTube channel. I've got that linked in the description as well. It's called Right Reason. And
there's not much there at the moment, but there will be when I get around to it. I don't want to spend all my dopamine.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. See you guys later. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?